Welcome to Afrik Express business segment. Today we are looking at Africa, your next destination for business investment and vacation. Afrik Express was at the New York Stock Exchange at the African Head of States Investment Summit. This summit was for African Head of State and business investors to dialogue about investment opportunities and resources in Africa. Our first view is on future capital market in Africa. Let's take a look at the discussion.
Today we have an ambitious mission, 4 key objectives. Number 1, enabling investment. How can we identify more sources of information and research for institutional investors? Second of all, convening venues, establishing a platform for really facilitating investment and growing relationships that are critical to that. 3, a political venue for the African leaders that are here for the General Assembly, so they can introduce their views on private sector development and their investment initiatives. And finally, to broadcast very important African success stories through the AI Index Series Awards as an inspiration for more investment and for governance and better regulation.
For years, investors have been enthusiastic about the potential of investing in Africa. The continent's economic pulse has quickened over the last 10 years, with GDP growth rates growing at more than 5%, more than double what we saw in the 1980s and 1990s. And really that's been driven from the telecom, banking and retail sectors, which are all flourishing in Africa, but particularly the commodities sectors, which are booming. Despite recent upheavals, and maybe I should probably paraphrase what I was going to say here with the context of we're not seeing the end of this, but what we're seeing in North Africa and almost what we're seeing in global demand from foreign direct investment is there continues to be good appetite for investment into African continent. Now, let's see what happens on the back of what we're seeing in the north of the country. But I think the overall sentiment is that the long-term FDI inflows into the country and countries around the African continent is still very positive. And this has been evidenced by the number of African funds that have increased over the past couple of years, and also reinforced, if you will, by a recent Ernst & Young report, which looked at foreign direct investment into the continent of Africa, which predicted that there was going to be more foreign direct investment to the scale of 150 billion by 2015, which was up from 84 billion in 2010. So clearly a major long-term trend which they're anticipating will continue into Africa.
I think, first of all, there are several reasons why I think Africa is well poised to grow at very strong levels going into the future, in spite of the current difficult situation we are facing. Africa is home to 25% of the world's resources, and when we built in the growth that we're seeing right now in India and China, and the demand for resources that these countries will need so as to support their growth, I think they will turn more and more towards Africa for these resources. So definitely the future as far as economic growth in Africa is good, and when we try to extend that to exchanges, we will naturally expect that exchanges will capture the growth that we're seeing on the macroeconomic front. Secondly, another very strong case for optimism regarding African economies, and then of course by extension African exchanges, it's Many of these African countries are already undergoing what we call structural adjustment programs. They are opening up. They are really positioning themselves as attractive investment destinations. If you look at the World Bank Ease of Doing Business reports over the last few years, you'll see that many African exchanges have improved their performances and classification.
If you observe Uganda, our exchange has become active towards the end of our privatization program. So Rwanda is fortunate that most of the sales of the government assets can be listed. In fact, they have made a policy decision in government to ensure that that happens. So every privatization activity that they announce is going to be part sold, either part sold or fully sold on the exchange, which is, I think, brilliant in that apart from achieving the privatization policy goals, they're able to now pursue the goals of creating a dynamic exchange. So we're looking at that program with a lot of interest, and we think it's going to succeed. They have had 2 IPOs so far, which were both hugely oversubscribed, and we think there's a lot of interest in Rwanda as a country at the moment. If you look at Uganda, where most of the privatization work has been done, you really can't compare with Rwanda. But what's happening in Uganda, for instance, is that we're now creating an environment where we believe there's enough of a stock of local companies that can be listed and can create a critical commerce on the exchange. And by the end of the year, we shall have a framework that will be attractive, that we think will be attractive enough to make local companies come to the list. They have had challenges in the previous few years, and we have worked with them to resolve issues of governance, to bring up standards of bookkeeping, and we believe that there's going to be a stream now coming out of that lot of companies that will be listed. So it's a different flavor, a probably different type of risk for an investor to begin to look at. Kenya, on the other hand, is right in the middle. They started the privatization program about 20 years ago, but it has been proceeding very deliberately, and they're very selective on what comes to the market and what's put out for sale. So they're right in the middle, and as improvements take place in the exchange environment, the government is attracted to bring more companies to the market.
There were other stakeholders at this summit. Some of them we had an opportunity to speak with. This particular person is Ambassador Rokwana, who is the coordinator of the African Union Summit 2012. When we spoke with him, we discussed issues of diasporans investing in Africa or returning home, at least literally to invest in Africa, and various opportunities that are there for Africans that are in diaspora to be a part of the new economic growth in Africa.
Well, a bit of history and perspective is that, of course, the diaspora is not an exclusive to the African continent. The diaspora is a perennial issue that has always attached to various nations throughout the world. I think some of those better known ones would represent, for instance, the Jewish diaspora, the Indian diaspora, and so forth. Very little people reflect and go back to history and say, how is it that the Jewish state came into existence? The Jewish state came into existence, amongst others, through the formation of the people that were dispersed outside the Jewish state, who then formed themselves into a unit and found a way in which they could galvanize their efforts to try and rebuild the state of Israel to a very large degree. This they did in various measures. But suffice to say that of significance, if you look back in a 20-year existence at one stage, they were able, after establishing what was called the Jewish Diaspora Bond, to grow it up to a level of $26 billion. Now that's quite a sizable chunk of money through which you could then be able to rebuild the state institutions and stuff like that. The Indian diaspora has done itself proud in terms of what it has been able to do to rejuvenate the Indian economy through the nationals of India that are in foreign lands. They have been able to get involved in the pharmaceutical industry, which is becoming fast a giant in competition to the rest in the world. The IT industry, it is a known fact that the Indians have become fairly competitive in that particular environment, and all of this was spurred on by the role that these diasporans were able to play in terms of contributing back to their place of origin. So we speak about the African diaspora from a similar kind of perspective, in acknowledgement of the fact that indeed, whilst the diaspora itself, the African diaspora, may have emerged from largely two factors. One, the transatlantic slave, indeed a period that was not only painful but cruel, inhuman, and certainly barbaric in terms of how the countries that were involved in slavery were able to industrialize through the subjugation of the African people. But fact of the matter is that that's how Africans left the continent to a very large degree.
We know in the United States, a lot of Caribbeans do not identify themselves as Africans. The Latin America do not identify themselves as Africans. Now, how can we, or what kind of education can these people be offered to get them to start seeing or to identify themselves as Africans? Because again, the reality is in America, they do not, especially the Latin Americans, they don't think they are Africans.
Yeah.
So I see a bit, living in America, I see that a bit expanding it.
No, that's there are two aspects to your question. The one is the one of identity in terms of a collective, but there is also the identity in terms of an individual. Let me address both. I think at the core of what you are saying is the question of how is it, and maybe there is a background and a basis. If all you ever imagined, and that's what spurs us on, if all you ever imagined about a people was negative definition about who they are, their condition, and what is it they contribute amongst competing nations, it is not inconceivable that indeed over a period of time, the characterization of themselves as a people of no worth or refusal to be associated with a particular negativized group would be the consequence that you reflect. Because who wants to be associated with negatives? Nobody wants to. That, of course, should not be construed as both intellectual and lazy excuse around the responsibility that we have as a people to put at the center of our existence the centrality of our own identity.
Thank you.